Hello and welcome to the GPP Chin Music Podcast. Of course, you know us. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Josh Shepardson at BChad 50. And we'll start off by saying it's Clayton Kershaw Day, or is it? Because they're saying now he may be scratched. News just coming out that he is dealing with a sore hip/glute. So, keep monitoring Twitter as tonight goes on. He's the guy that you want. He's by far the best pitcher in the best spot tonight. It's not even close. So, this is a GPP podcast that changes things more so for cash games. Actually, a lot. But definitely keep your eye on that because, it's going to be a huge thing to know in GPPs as well, whether or not this 15,000 on DK or 13,300 on FanDuel pitcher is going tonight or not.
You could say this news just kind of hanging up in the air is a real pain in the butt, but
Yeah.
I won't make that bad joke. I'll leave that for somebody else to make. But yeah, to be honest, on DraftKings, I'm more inclined to use Kershaw in GPPs tonight if he is healthy, just because I do think you can get two cheap pitchers, and you're going to want two cheaper pitchers, and you can still get the big bats there in cash games. On FanDuel, it's a little easier to budget for him with just the one pitcher, I think. There just isn't a really good, cheap secondary cash games arm to pair with Kershaw. I'd much rather grab from that middle tier. But Kershaw's ceiling, we know it's through the roof. What he's done over the last month is unreal. So if Kershaw's in, definitely a GPP consideration for me on DraftKings. Maybe pair him with a guy like down in the bottom of the barrel like Tillman, or a big favorite like R.A. Dickey. Hope they get you a handful of points and that Kershaw goes out there and spins one of these gems. He's got 2 shutouts in the last month, 2 shutouts in his last 4 starts, and he's allowed 1 earned run in over 30 innings. That's unheard of. Yeah. That's just ridiculous.
He's averaging 25 FanDuel points a game over his last 3 and almost 50, I think it's 49 DraftKings points. So it's just absolutely ridiculous what's going on with him right now. So either way, keep your eyes peeled for that. We'll talk about some other options. Tyson Ross, of course, $10,800. He gets the Mets. We know his one main concern is walk rate, but elite ground ball rate. He's elite at keeping the ball in the ballpark, does not give up home runs ever. So really when he gets himself into trouble, it's by giving up free passes. And he has a couple games in his past 3 games in his past 8 with 5 walks. But last time out, 0 walks, but struggled a little bit against Miami. The guy has big upside when he's on, and this is just not a very good Mets offense. So I think he's going to be a fairly popular play tonight. And then not right below him, but below him, I know you and I both like Jose Quintana despite the tough ballpark. He's been very good recently. Boston is better at home, but they're also a team that doesn't hit left-handed pitching very well. Quintana coming off that complete game shutout against Cleveland's. Outside of a game against KC, he's been very good over his last 5 starts. So I'm a big fan of Quintana in tournaments again.
Yeah, and you have to love facing somewhat injury-ravaged Red Sox squad. They're without Dustin Pedroia. Mookie Betts is out indefinitely with a concussion. So there's your top 2 table setters in that lineup out, and then we know Ortiz is significantly better against righties than lefties, so that looks like a very exploitable matchup for Quintana. He is a small road dog, but I love what he's doing this year. Great numbers. ERA estimator is actually best as ERA, which is fairly solid. Strikeout rate's been on the rise, as I expected it to be a few starts ago. The swinging strikes have been there all year, and now the strikeouts are finally coming with it. And the Red Sox just are not a good offense against left-handed pitching, so love Jose Quintana against the Red Sox tonight. Really like his price point at $8,300 as an SP2 on DraftKings. 84 is a fair price on FanDuel. The name that I expect to be super popular on FanDuel, just based on price, even if he weren't as talented as he is, $6,700 Lance McCullers. But McCullers is very talented. He's basically a Tyson Ross-like pitcher. Occasionally struggles with walks, but he's got a better walk rate than Ross. Big strikeout rate. And the Angels were without Mike Trout the other day. Could be without him again today. He is listed as day-to-day. Did have an MRI on his wrist. There's just some inflammation. There's a possibility he's back, but if he's out tonight, really got to like Lance McCullers against an Angels lineup where, as I said before the show, if it's without Trout, you throw 4 fingers up for Pujols, and that's a wrap. Like, just work around the rest of that lineup, which is pretty much garbage, and let McCullers just mow him down. The biggest knock on him, he doesn't pitch terribly deep into games when his control is a little bit off. Has only gone 7 innings or more, I believe, once in his last 5 starts. But he does strike out a lot of batters, so that does help offset the short starts a little bit. And he is a favorite, so I do like McCullers quite a bit. High ceiling there, especially if he is sharp, because if he limits the walks, we know the strikeouts can be there, and he can throw up zeros. He can limit base runners. He's only had 1 start this year in which he's allowed more than 3 earned runs. So really, really high ceiling pitcher there.
Yeah, and like we were saying, I mean, he's a guy who he'd be among the league leaders in home runs per 9 if he was qualified. So it's definitely a good spot for him tonight. No one else that really jumps out. I mean, a lot of guys you feel okay about, but there's not many other guys that really just have a lot of upside. We talked before the show about Masahiro Tanaka, who has been good, but considering his price tag tonight, he just doesn't have a huge ceiling. He's gone 7+ innings each of his last 3 games, but still hasn't even reached 30 DraftKings points in any of his last 10 starts. So, I mean, he's a fine play, but I think I don't know. I would say he's a better cash game play tonight, but I don't consider any player pitching in Texas right now in that heat and humidity to be a cash game play. So, for me, Tanaka, he's going to be low owned, but I just don't see enough upside that he's a guy I'm going to be actively targeting in tournaments. If Kershaw's scratched, maybe I consider him a little bit more just because you want those guys that can get 30 points, high 20s. There's not a lot of those tonight, but outside of that, just not a guy I just have big expectations for today.
Yeah, I think the one name that I would go with a little bit off the board, especially if Kershaw is scratched and you're looking for upside, the punch-outs just haven't been there this year. But Garrett Richards still has a really big arsenal, and he is facing an Astros lineup that does strike out a lot against right-handers. I'd feel much more comfortable using him at Minute Maid than using Tanaka in that heat in Texas, because as you saw yesterday, the ball is absolutely flying at Texas when it gets hot there. And I mean, granted, Tanaka is certainly better than anything that anyone that got the ball yesterday, whether that's Capuano, any of those relievers, Martin Perez. But still, man, facing a very left-handed dominant Rangers lineup in that heat and humidity is a little bit dicey. So if I'm going to roll the dice on a guy in that upper price range around Ross, it's going to be Richards probably. But again, I mean, they lag a little bit behind the other names that we already threw out there. Quintana, Ross, namely.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we move on here to catcher, it's going to be interesting tonight because there's 2 guys I know you and I both really like. The more affordable one being Brian McCann against Colby Lewis. He's left-handed and he has power in that ballpark against Colby Lewis. There's a lot of things going for him. You got to love lefties against Lewis. And then Russell Martin. I know everyone likes to target Toronto at home against a lefty, but home against a bad righty, they are nearly as good. Had the highest team total last night at 5.5. Highest team total again tonight at 5. So for me, I love Russell Martin. I think McCann a close second, but if you factor in price, I think McCann a slightly better play. So, but I also think that McCann will be higher owned. So for me, I think Martin probably a bit lower owned because he's more expensive, but that's really the only tiebreaker here for me.
Yeah, the other 2 names that I'm considering a catcher tonight are Yasmani Grandal, assuming he catches Kershaw. Kershaw is typically caught by A.J. Ellis, but Grandal has caught him a few times of late. And if Kershaw scratched, there's a possibility that Grandal's in there anyway. But the other name that I like is Matt Wieters, $2,900 on DraftKings. We know that he's been better against left-handed pitching as a switch hitter throughout his career, but really picked it up since the start of last year against righties. And gets one in Mike Foltynewicz, who's allowed a ridiculous 424 WOBA to left-handed batters in his career. Gotta love the park factors at Camden Yards for lefties, too. Great venue for enhancing run scoring and home runs. So really like Wieters, and he should be basically no threat for getting a day off since he did get one yesterday, and haven't heard anything about that stiff back that he dealt with over the weekend again. So really like Matt Wieters a lot tonight, especially if you're rostering some of these pricier pitchers and need some salary relief.
Yeah, and as you're looking at cheap guys, there's not a whole lot that jumps out. Giovanni Soto had a great game last night, but also hadn't started in 5 days before that, so you don't expect he's going to be in the lineup, but he's very cheap on both sites if he is. We know Rick Porcello, just not a very good pitcher right now, allowing a 336 WOBA to righties, so that's a guy I'll certainly be targeting quite a bit in my tournaments as some salary relief if he is in the lineup. You don't expect he'll probably be batting 5th like he did last night, but I think even if he's in round 6 or 7, he's near men's salary on both sites.
Yeah, and I mean, Porcello has just been awful this year, and I mean, you're not usually looking at the White Sox as a source of offense, but this series the bats seem to be coming alive.
Yeah, absolutely. First base options, there's a lot, as there always are. Keep your eye on Mark Teixeira, another one of those uncertain things. Got hit by a pitch in the foot last night and left. If he's in the lineup, you of course love him as a switch hitter against Colby Lewis. The guy has a monstrous ISO on the season, one of the highest at any position. So he didn't really get in on the festivities a whole lot last night, much like a lot of these other guys did. But once again, Colby Lewis, the guy you want to pick on. You're not expecting 21 runs, but if Teixeira's in the lineup, gotta like his prospects tonight. Freddie Freeman, if you're not playing Chris Tillman, looks like he's certainly healthy. Homered last night. Just went 1 for 5, but I mean that one home run went into the seats, so you gotta like that. And Tillman, if we see the Tillman from earlier in the season, then he's in line to get crushed. And then of course Joey Votto. If I saw this number correctly, I believe he's batting .561 since the All-Star break.
Sounds about right.
You look at what this guy's doing, and he's doing against good pitching too. So John Lackey, I mean, he's got nothing on Joey Votto tonight, so he's your contrarian. He shouldn't be contrarian tonight, but I think he still will with some other guys in really good spots.
Yeah, I also like Jose Abreu at the $4,600 DraftKings price point. He's been locked since the All-Star break, multiple hits in a number of games here recently, and just a really good hitter against a subpar pitcher in Porcello. Fielder, I think, is going to be somewhat contrarian because people do recognize that Tanaka is a very good pitcher. But at $4,200 on DraftKings, high upside at a pretty minimal cost. And then Chris Davis is also 4,200. Already noted the great park factors. Already noted Fulte's struggles with lefties. Should also note in Davis' case, he reached the seats twice yesterday. Has 5 homers in his last 10 games. So probably going to be a pretty popular pick today, but at least popular for good reason other than just chasing his recent home runs. Obviously, you don't get points for yesterday's homers, but with him locked in and facing a pitcher that struggles with lefties, not a bad play. And then I really like Adrian Gonzalez at 4,100 as well on DraftKings. His price point's not as attractive on FanDuel at 36, but gets Jesse Chavez, who's much better at home. The ballpark fits him at O.co. Chavez Ravine, Dodger Stadium might pose some problems for him against a lineup that just hammers right-handed pitching. And then the off-the-wall name that I'm going to give you is a guy that has actually heated up to start the second half. Guy that was ejected in the first inning of a game this week already. Mike Napoli. We do like Jose Quintana, but Napoli just $3,200 on DraftKings and checks in at $2,400 on FanDuel. If you are rostering Kershaw, you got to save money somewhere. Napoli offers you a nice cheap option at first base who has some power, good ballpark factors at Fenway, and getting a lefty. And we know that Napoli, even in a down year, is having a solid season against left-handed pitching at least.
Yeah, he is. And you mentioned he's been great since the All-Star break, so if you want to ride the hot hand, you can do it for cheap, too. Not much risk involved there. Ryan Howard at 3,700, another guy with some big-time upside. And outside of that, I mean, first base, I don't really love a lot of these guys. One more guy you can consider is Justin Bour. Doug Fister, contact pitcher. Justin Bour's got some power. Hasn't really done much recently, but he is really cheap on both sites. So if you want to chase a home run, although you hope he doesn't hit the center, because I know we all remember that one a couple weeks ago that he absolutely smoked and just kind of dropped like there's a force field right at the wall. I mean, that's still a big ballpark, but he's a guy that definitely does have some power, though, if you want to chase the long ball.
Yeah, and one more name I'll throw out there for salary relief, namely on DraftKings, where he's $2,100.
Yep.
First base, outfield eligible, Darren Ruff. The Phillies are at Toronto, so they will get to hit with a DH. Usually Ruff reserved for facing left-handed pitchers as the first baseman, but I expect him to probably serve as a designated hitter tonight, even with the righty on the hill. I mean, the Phillies lineup is limited for what bats they can bring out there. So Ruff has big power. If Dickey's knuckleball's not exactly dancing, Ruff can certainly put one in the seats. And at $2,100, you can play him at first base, you can play him in the outfield. That's a near minimum salary player, which is huge on a Kershaw slate, especially on a $15,000 Clayton Kershaw slate.
Yeah, very good point there. You're going to need to have at least one guy around that price in your lineup tonight to get Kershaw in comfortably. Second base options, not a lot to love. Rougned Odor has some big upside, but he's facing Tanaka. Like we said, it is Tanaka, and he is a good pitcher, but I don't feel like many pitchers will be faring well in this ballpark in this weather today. So certainly considering him. A couple other guys, Jimmy Paredes, especially on FanDuel where he's really cheap, gets Mike Fultonwitz. We've mentioned his struggles there. Luis Valbuena, this is DK specific because he's second base, third base, but he's got some big-time upside if Garrett Richards struggles again tonight. We know Valbuena certainly never, ever a cash game play, but this is the GPP podcast, which is the only place where he belongs in your lineups.
Yeah, very true. I also like... Colton Wong at 4,100 on DraftKings and 3,300 on FanDuel. Desclafini, not great against left-handed batters, so Wong gets to take advantage of that from the leadoff spot. Gotta like that. And beyond that, yeah, the position's not terribly exciting. Anthony Rendon, I feel like you're getting a slight discount on DraftKings for his true talent level at 3,400. He is coming off the DL. It's been a very forgettable season for him to this point, but his track record against all pitchers speaks pretty well for himself. So I do like him as a decent play, especially if he continues to hit leadoff as he did the other day. At 3,400, it's at least some salary relief, but yeah, not really looking at many cheap options at the Keystone position today.
I do have one cheap option I'll throw out there, Stephen Drew. He's a lefty that's not a very good hitter, but he does have a lot of power. Colby Lewis, as we know, struggles against lefties, so more so on FanDuel where he's cheaper, but you can also play him at shortstop on DraftKings, so that's an interesting way to get some pop there for cheap.
Yep.
Third base options, I love Josh Donaldson again. We know what he does to lefties. He's pretty good against righties again. Mentioned that Toronto team total, so I think he'll go much lower owned than he should tonight. I like him quite a bit. Manny Machado, Fultonwitz is better against righties, but Machado also better against righties. Those reverse splits this year, so I'll take Machado in that matchup tonight. You gotta like him. And then I know there's a guy right below him actually on DraftKings that you're a big fan of tonight. So who's your GPP play there?
Right below him on FanDuel as well. Maikel Franco, 4,300 on DraftKings, 3,300 on FanDuel. He's been absolutely on fire since the All-Star break. He's really just hit the ground running at the big league level. He's that rare hitter with above-average power that also makes a lot of contact. Gotta like that. Rogers Center is a great place for having power, and Franco's power should play at the Rogers Center north of the border pretty well tonight. And again, if Dickey's knuckleball is not dancing, then there are a few hitters in that Phillies lineup that can punish him for that, and no more so than Franco, I believe.
Yeah, and I'll throw one more guy, another Yankee. Better play on FanDuel where he's cheaper, but Chase Headley. You don't love his lineup spot, but I mean, we saw it last night. You wanted whatever pieces you could get off that environment, so I'm looking to get some cheap pieces where I can. And then as far as really cheap options go, really nothing that stands out in a significant way. But one guy, assuming that Mike Trout is out, he should have a decent lineup spot. Connor Gillespie. Spencer mentioned him earlier on the FanDuel podcast. You don't love the matchup against Lance McCullers, but the guy's been hitting pretty well. And for near minimum salary on both sites, I think he's a fine guy to just slot in your lineups and kind of move on. And then Tyler Saladino, you can play at third base on DraftKings.
Yeah, as you said, beyond them, there really isn't a lot to like in the bargain bin tonight.
Yep, not at all. Shortstops, I love Carlos Correa. Garrett Richards is a good play or a good pitcher, but he has had his struggles at times. Correa is just mashing everything, leading all AL shortstops and home runs in just 42 games so far this year. So we know the kind of power that he has. And then, you look right below them, and it's pretty top-heavy. You got Tulo against Jerome Williams. You got Hanley Ramirez against the lefty, a good lefty in Quintana, but still way too cheap there at $3,900 on DraftKings.
Yeah, wouldn't it be something if Tulo were to announce his presence with authority tonight north of the border? Gotta like the price point on DraftKings, just $4,100 against Jerome Williams. $4,000 actually probably enhances his GPP appeal on FanDuel because he is a little bit pricier there, a little bit tougher to budget for, a little bit more expensive than Correa. Should suppress his ownership just a touch, but as you noted, high team total there for the Blue Jays tonight. Xander Bogaerts in play. We typically like him more in cash games, but at $3,400 against a lefty, gotta like him a little bit in GPPs as well because because of what he allows you to do with the rest of your lineup, plus his lineup spot. I mean, if you're hitting third, what he's doing against lefties is at an above-average clip. I mean, he's hitting at a high level, even if it's not coming with a lot of power. But beyond that, there's not a heck of a lot that I like. I mean, you can use Johnny Peralta, $3,800 on DraftKings. I think he's going to be pretty popular, as you and I discussed before the pod on FanDuel, at just $2,800. But on DraftKings, makes for an interesting swerve because he is just $100 cheaper than Hanley, just $300 cheaper than Tulo, and you'd expect both of them to be higher owned than Peralta. Peralta still hits in the heart of his team's order, still has above average power, and Desclafini not much better than an average pitcher at best. So I do like him a little bit as well.
Yeah, and Didi Gregorius over here.
Yep.
Very cheap, $2,500 on FanDuel, $31 on DraftKings. This guy, in his last 5 starts, he has 3 hits, 2 hits, 3 hits, and 4 hits. Last night, a triple and 3 RBIs. Night before, 3 hits and a homer. I mean, if you want a cheap piece of Colby Lewis with a guy who's been hitting, you're never going to like his lineup spot, but in GPPs, you don't care. I think you said the other day, home run counts the same from the 8 spot as it does from the 3 spot.
Yep.
So if you want to chase a guy who's been a hot hitter and one of the best lineups in baseball right now, I think Gregorius is a great way to go.
Yeah, and you really just have to love getting left-handed batters in there against Lewis, especially on the cheap.
Yeah, absolutely. Outfield, another one of those situations where you don't necessarily need to pay up. Jose Bautista is day-to-day here. You like him against Jerome Williams, but he says it was just a cramp. I'm not convinced that the Blue Jays are going to need him at all. Not that he contributed much last night, but you certainly aren't going to need him to beat Jerome Williams. If he's in a lineup, you love him. He's pretty affordable on FanDuel, more expensive on DraftKings. In case we had to say it one more time, your lefties from the Yankees, Gardner, Ellsbury, Carlos Beltran, all those guys in play in the outfield. We'll just kind of lump them all together, whichever one you want to fit. Obviously, Ellsbury and Gardner are better than Beltran, but Beltran near minimum on FanDuel if you just want a little bit of a filler.
Yeah, I mean, I love the price point of Ellsbury at just $4,400 on DraftKings. Very easy to budget for. Even Guardy at sub $5,000 looks pretty good at just $4,900. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at Adam Jones against Fultonwitz as well, $4,100. You'd like him better if he was left-handed facing Fultonwitz, but Fulte hasn't exactly been good against righties either. Jones does well against right-handed pitching as well. And if he struggles, I mean, you figure that Pac-Man is in a nice lineup spot, hitting third for the O's. Most likely, anyways. They have dropped Machado down there a few times, but that's typically against lefties. But, I mean, that lineup is definitely explosive. Camden Yards is a good ballpark for putting up numbers. Reminder, Hanley Ramirez, underpriced a bit. If you're not using him as shortstop on DK, also qualifies in the outfield. And he checks in at $3,400, which is more of a fair price on FanDuel. So not really getting much of a discount there. But if Shin-Soo Choo hits towards the top of the order, Tanaka's a tough matchup, but we did see him and Odor hit 1-2 for them the other day against a righty. If the Shields is back at his top spot and Choo is hitting down order, you don't like him as much, but if he is hitting in one of those top 2 lineup spots, Choo at $3,700 looks pretty good on DraftKings. And not a lot in the way of cheap bats, but I am looking at Preston Tucker for $33 and Colby Rasmus for cheap power for $3,100 on DraftKings. Both love hitting at Minute Maid Park, and how can you not? Great ballpark for power, great ballpark for offense, and a couple of left-handed batters, so they will hold the platoon advantage over Garrett Richards tonight.
Yeah, and if Jose Bautista sits out, you want to get yourself some cheap pieces of Toronto. So Ezekiel Carrera could get a start. He's only $2,400. He's not a power hitter. He does have homers in each of his last 2 starts. You're certainly not chasing that. But at the same time, a decent hitter for $2,400 in that matchup. You don't mind him. Kevin Pillar, $2,500 on FanDuel and $37 on DraftKings. Another one of those guys who hasn't been great recently, but he went through a stretch earlier in the season where he was hitting the ball really well. And then, of course, Chris Colabello you consider. I want to get as many cheap pieces of Toronto bats as fillers when I can, because, like I said, the highest team total of the night, certainly want to go that way. And then Melky Cabrera, I mean,
White hot, and he's going to bat left-handed against Rick Porcello. Two really good things, and you throw in that Fenway factor, and it is hard not to like Melky Cabrera tonight. 3,800 is a fair price point on DraftKings too.
yeah.
Certainly not overpriced. Good lineup spot typically for him. So the White Sox bats have come alive against this trash Red Sox pitching, and Cabrera is certainly in that mix.
Yeah, Melky has 9 RBIs in 9 of his last 10 games. Multi-hits in, I think, 7 or 8 of those. I mean, the guy, like you said, he is just absolutely locked in. So I'm a big fan of his as well. But anybody else you want to mention before we get out of here?
Nope, that's going to wrap it up for me.
All right. And as always, it's close to the trade deadline. So keep all these things, like keep your eyes on Twitter, because we've seen guys even be in lineups and then still get traded. So you got to be ready up until lock tonight, especially on FanDuel where you don't have late swaps. So keep that in mind. But follow us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.